Ohana means family. Family means no one's left behind or forgotten. So much for that, apparently. Hello there, folks. So we have to deal with topical stuff again. And hopefully, fingers crossed, no major developments happen between when I record this and when it actually is scheduled to go up. Let me just go ahead and stop you right there past me. That proved to be a sadly optimistic hope. This thing has continued to evolve and at a much faster pace than I expected. I am actually recording this bit the morning that the video goes up because stuff won't stop happening. So here's what I'm going to ask you to keep in mind. I am going to be talking in quite a bit in this video about how Disney has not issued any kind of specific apology, nor has its CEO properly addressed what has gone on. Now, as of the day before this video goes up, there's been reporting around some specifics that if you're already aware of might make you go, wait, isn't some of the stuff that they're saying hasn't happened actually happened? And yes, but I'm not going to redo this entire video. For two reasons. One, I have spent way too much time on this already. And two, I actually think there is value in preserving, in a way, the timeline of what has gone on so that you understand the process by which we got to where we are and what a roller coaster this entire thing has been. And I do feel that leaving in things as I originally intended with addendums as we go will preserve that much better than trying to start all over. Don't worry, at the end I will come back to the latest stuff that's gone on. Okay, let's go. We are going to be talking about what is colloquially known as the Don't Say Gay bill, which has passed the state house in Florida, and the governor, Ron DeSantis, has indicated he is likely to sign into law, and how the moving forward of that bill has come to affect the Disney company. Now, there's actually a lot to go over because the whole situation is a lot more complicated than a lot of the discourse I've seen. A lot of the discourse has been dealing with the very stripped down summary of what's been going on. And while I'm not going to say a lot of it's inaccurate, it is incomplete. And what I wanted to do here was do as complete a look at what is going on as possible. I'm breaking this into three major parts. One, discussing the law itself, which is probably going to be the driest portion of this because I am going to be reading some of the exact wording of the bill. Yeah, I did read it. It wasn't the hardest thing in the world. It's only 7 pages. It's not the densest legalese in the world. But I'm going to discuss the bill itself, what's actually in it, and the implications of it, and what is liable to happen as a result of it. Second part will be discussing how it has been linked to Disney. And then a third part discussing how Disney has been dealing with these connections and my thoughts on how they have been doing that. So my own opinions should not be difficult for anyone to parse, just to look at me, but I will be giving them throughout. But the final section is going to focus on my thoughts in regards to Disney in specific. I'll give you the quick overview. The law is terrible. The fact that Disney is linked to the support of it is not inaccurate, but is a little bit more nuanced and complicated than people are saying, and Disney has not been doing a great job at responding to those connections. That's the short version, but we've got a lot to go through, starting with the law itself. The law that we are talking about is House Bill 1557, officially called Parental Rights in Education. So the Don't Say Gay is the term being used by mainly opponents of it because they're basically talking about the practical outcome of this law as opposed to the wording that the law itself is aiming for. Now, this bill was sponsored by State Senator Dennis Baxley and State Representative Joe Harding. Those two names are going to come up again, but I don't want to let anybody off the hook here. So in addition to that, it was also co-sponsored by State Representatives Barrero, Fernandez-Barquin, Fine, Latvala, Maggard, Roach, and Snyder. These are the people who have brought the bill forward. Now, that's not a full list of everyone who voted in favor of it, but those are the main sponsors and the co-sponsors. Now, the version of the bill that I went over is dated from the 22nd of February. Now, there have been attempts to add more amendments since then. They haven't passed. So this version is the one that is being presented to the governor to sign off on. So this is the version that will be going into effect. Now, I'm not going to read the entire thing front to back because that's more dry than I'm prepared to get. I am going to focus on the specific sections that really directly impact the practical outcomes, and it's why people are calling it the Don't Say Gay bill. So this is all about parents, students, and school districts. So with that in mind, let's start with Section 1. The procedures must reinforce the fundamental right of parents to make decisions regarding the upbringing and control of their children by requiring school district personnel to encourage a student to discuss issues relating to his or her well-being with his or her parent, or to facilitate discussion of the issue with the parent. Now, right off the bat, we're already getting into one of the big quagmires of this, which is this is codifying into law a requirement of teachers and school districts to bring things to the attention of parents. Now, before you say, well, why wouldn't they bring things to the attention of parents? Let me jump in with a little bit more personal information from me. I have, in the course of my life, been very close to a number of educators who have given me stories, not specifically related to this, but like I've just heard over time of students who were some form of LGBTQIA+, be it gay, be it bisexual, be it trans, be it non-binary, who came from homes where that was not supported. And those teachers did their best to support those students at the school, knowing that there was no support for them at home. Now, while as worded, it does not specifically say that teachers have to inform parents that their kid is trans or requesting different pronouns or whatever, it does say anything related to their mental well-being. And it is very easy to make the argument, because it's true, that a disconnect between how someone is able to present themselves at school and how they feel it is safe for them to present at home is not good for their mental well-being. And so now any teacher noting that has a requirement to notify the parents. That's regardless of whether or not they believe that will be harmful to the student. And if you think I'm overreading that, stick with me. I will back up what I just said. Section 2. A school district may not adopt procedures or student support forms that prohibit school district personnel from notifying a parent about his or her student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being, or a change in related services or monitoring, or that encourage or have the effect of encouraging a student to withhold from a parent such information. So this is now also tying the school's hands, saying you can't put your own rules in place to carve out exceptions for the first part that we said. And again, the specific phrase of a change in related services or monitoring is pretty directly, without saying flat out, talking about the way a student wishes to present. This is kind of the official terminology for a student wishing to be referred to by a different name or different pronouns than what might be on their legal documentation. That is a change in monitoring. That is a change in how the teachers is being requested to interact with the students. That is now required to be reported to parents, regardless of how the parents feel about transition or LGBTQIA+ people. And I'll inject another personal thing here. I understand some folks really don't get why informing the parents is going to be a problem. I'm going to let you know something here. Years ago, I used to have a series on the Vera Wild channel called Dear Vera, where I would answer questions that I received through email. Now, a frighteningly common thing that I found myself having to do, and it broke my heart every time I had to do it, was there were more than a few times where I felt it necessary to advise young trans people who were still living at home and still under the care and control of their parents, who knew to a near certainty that their parents would not support them and would likely eject them from the home. I had to advise those people, you probably shouldn't come out to your parents, because so many of them came to me asking, what can I say to make them understand, hoping that I could give them some kind of secret magical phrase that would make them supportive, but it doesn't exist. And I'm not even an educator. But I have had to repeatedly, because I thought it was the best out of a lot of bad options, advise young trans people, you probably shouldn't tell your family until you know for certain you have someplace to go if your home becomes no longer safe. Whether it be with friends, with a supportive relative, if you have the ability now to support yourself and be outside the home, then that is the time to possibly try this. If you do it too soon, it is, well, it's the reason why LGBTQIA plus individuals make up a disproportionate percentage of homeless youth because they are ejected from homes. And again, this law is requiring the reporting back of these sorts of things to parents. And those parents may not be supportive at all. Now, the final sentence in section 2 is where a whole lot of people are going to say, oh, well, clearly you're wrong because of this sentence. I'm going to read you the sentence, and in a little bit, we'll explain why this actually doesn't make a difference. This subparagraph does not prohibit a school district from adopting procedures that permit school personnel to withhold such information from a parent if a reasonably prudent person would believe that disclosure would result in abuse, abandonment, or neglect, as those terms are defined in statute 39.01. Now, you would be forgiven for hearing that and thinking that, well, I clearly just blew out of proportion all the things that came before, because here's the section that says if they think the parents will be negligent, abandoning, or otherwise will be harmful and abusive to the child, they don't have to report that. Well, two things. The first is I did actually take a look at that statute for the definition of abuse as defined under Florida Statute 39.01, and I was originally planning to go over that statute and how it's pretty vague in a lot of areas, and the only place where it does get specific is in aspects of physical abuse. It makes references to emotional abuse and mental abuse, but gives no specific citations of what sort of things to look out for. And even its laying out of what physical abuse is more about saying anything that is short of this, we do not count as physical abuse. But I'm not going to go any more detailed than that broad overview I just gave you, because something we're going to cover in a little bit means that it doesn't matter anyways. Getting back to HB 1557, Section 3. Classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3, or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. Now, I was not able to find those specific state standards that it is referencing because it didn't give me a specific statute to refer to. So I couldn't find out more detail on that. Here's what I can say about this whole section, though. It eliminates even bringing up the topics of identity or sexual orientation for kindergarten through third grade. Now, again, there may be people out there going, why would you be talking to kids that young about that anyway? Here's the thing. What you're probably imagining in your head is some sort of sit-down talk, like a sex ed conversation with these kids. That generally is not what actually happens. Again, while I may not live in Florida, I am and have been friends with many educators at many grade levels, including as young as kindergarten. The way in which the ideas of gender identity or sexual orientation are brought up to kids that young is as innocuous as reading a picture book where a character has two parents of the same gender. That's the kind of degree to which it gets brought up in those classes. Or maybe there is a student in the class who has family members who are same-sex couples, or who maybe they themselves or someone else in their family has a gender identity that is not what they were assigned at birth. And it allows for that conversation to be had, that child to talk about it, for other students to talk about it, to put it into context of the greater world. This law would prohibit any of that, even if it has direct applicability to the students in the classroom. The law seems to be built around the idea that children have no encountering of any of this stuff from kindergarten through third grade, and certainly not before. But the fact is that's simply not true. Not because they're being taught about it in any formal event, but just because that's a part of a lot of their lives. But now suddenly it's a part of their lives that is not allowed to be discussed or brought up at all. And because I could not find those state standards for the grades over third grade, I do not know how restrictive those actually are. But a bit like the thing about concerns of parental abuse, as a result, it actually doesn't matter how restrictive the things are because of, again, something we're going to get to in a little bit. Now we get to jump ahead to Section 6. Before administering a student well-being questionnaire or health screening form to a student kindergarten through grade 3, the school district must provide the questionnaire or health screening form to the parent and obtain permission of the parent. Now, I did look into what a well-being questionnaire consists of, generally speaking. Obviously, they kind of vary depending on where you are and who's written the thing. But broadly speaking, it is what it sounds like. It is a questionnaire to determine the general well-being, both positive and negative, of the individual that is being asked these questions. The idea that even concerned teachers, administrators, nurses, anybody involved in the school cannot administer a questionnaire to try and just get a better sense of, is a kid actually okay, without first not only alerting the parents, but seeking their permission, meaning the reason why these kids might not be okay has to sign off on them being asked whether or not they're okay. Do we not see how fundamentally messed up that is? And I'm not trying to overinflate the notion of parental abuse, but the simple fact is kids at that age, if somebody is causing them distress and harming their well-being, statistically, it is most likely their parents or another family member. Next up, Section 7. Each school district shall adopt procedures for a parent to notify the principal or his or her designee regarding concerns under this paragraph at his or her student's school, and the process of resolving those concerns within 7 calendar days of notification by the parent. Now, this in and of itself isn't awful, although the 7 calendar days really did make me raise an eyebrow. 7 calendar days. Not 7 business days, not 7 working days, not 7 school days, 7 calendar days. So my kids' winter break started on the 22nd of December in this most recent year. It did not end until the 3rd of January. So in theory, if this law were in application where I lived back at that time, a parent could have notified their concerns to a school on the 21st, and then because it's 7 calendar days, the school, everyone who is be wrapped up in this, administrative, specific teacher, etc., would have to be working over the course of a vacation to have it done within 7 days. Making it 7 calendar days is really weird and makes it rife for abuse by people who wish to cause the most inconvenience and trouble possible. So now we get to the section why I said various other things didn't matter, like what the actual state guidelines for talking about gender or sexual identities or orientations are doesn't matter, why the fact that there is a written carve out so that teachers or school administrators don't have to tell parents if they think it will result in abuse don't matter. Those exceptions do not matter because of this section. Section 7B. A parent may request the Commission of Education to appoint a special magistrate who is a member of the Florida Bar in good standing and has at least 5 years' experience in administrative law. So I'm not going to read everything in between that and the next section I'm going to go over, but it then lays out primarily a timetable through which the magistrate will conduct its investigation, gather the facts, make a recommendation to the Board of Education of Florida, who will then either accept or reject that recommendation. But the thing we really got to deal with is the last sentence. The cost of the special magistrate shall be borne by the school district. Hold that in your head. We're not quite done yet. A court may award damages and shall award reasonable attorney fees and court costs to a parent who receives declaratory or injunctive relief. First of all, while it does lay out an ability for parents to sue and receive relief through the courts, and in addition makes it so they can recoup their legal costs, there is no written language giving the school district a means to recoup any incurred legal cost. And that first bit, the special magistrate will be paid for by the school district. That is in all cases, no matter what happens. The instant a special magistrate is appointed and needs to start being paid for their time, The school district is the one who has to pay it, regardless of whether the school district ends up being victorious and proven right in their assertions of how they went about things. Regardless of whether the parent changes their mind and withdraws their protest, the school will still have to bear that cost. And this is why I said the other stuff doesn't matter. Hey there, folks. It's Vera speaking from the editing phase of this. So I feel like I need to add one quick note before I get any further into the video. I realized while editing that it seems like I'm implying that it should fall to the parents to pay for the special magistrate. That was not my intention. My point was more that there is zero mechanism by which the school can be financially exonerated for the burden it takes on. There is no funding set aside. There is no sort of way for them to recoup from the state, from anywhere. I'm not saying that that burden should automatically fall onto the parents or that it should be retaliatorily paid for by the parents if the parents lose. But I'm saying the fact that the school has zero means of recouping that cost by any mechanism whatsoever is a problem. I don't have a suggestion for what the best mechanism would be. I'm not a legislator. I'm pointing out the problems with the fact that there is none. Okay, back to it. Because the simple fact is that anybody has the ability at effectively zero cost to themselves, even if they don't take the step of actually suing them in court, they have the ability to rack up costs for the school district by protesting something that occurred, whether it be something that was brought up, something that was taught, or the fact that something was withheld from them, even if it was a case where the teacher or school or whoever thoroughly believed, and maybe even rightfully believed, that informing the parent would result in abuse or neglect. That parent can still request the magistrate, and the school has to pay for it no matter what. What this means from a strictly financially incentivized position is the best thing for schools to do is to never, ever find themselves in a position where they have to pay for a magistrate. Which means that that wiggle room that was in the earlier language about, well, there's an exception if they think it's going to be, if it's going to result in abuse, but the supposed abuser can still cause them to rack up costs. And no matter how strongly the school may feel about any given individual instance, these things can be brought against them completely without merit. The magistrate would actually have the job of finding out whether there's any merit to this in the first place. And even if there's zero merit, the school pays the cost. So the only way for the school not to lose massive amounts of their funding is to simply never, ever broach the subject or rock the boat, regardless of what they think is actually best for the students on an individual or a group basis. All the power has been handed to people who don't like any kind of information being provided to their kids about the mere existence of alternate sexualities to heterosexual and alternate gender identities to cisgender. And they do not need to prove a basis of complaint in order to rack up costs for the school. Costs that a school will probably not be able to bear multiple times across a year from multiple parents. This is where the real damage happens. Because regardless of the wording of anything else, schools can't afford it. They can't afford it. They cannot afford to advocate for their own students in the face of something like this. And this is why it's called the Don't Say Gay bill. Because the instant you broach the topic at all, you have opened yourself up to possibly full legal liability of being sued. And again, even if you win that, you don't get your court costs back if you're the school. The parents might if they win, but even if the school wins, there's no carve out to say that they can get their court costs back. But even if you're not brought to court, you got to pay for the special magistrate who is a lawyer who is going to bill hourly. And you have to do that every time there is a complaint. No school can afford that. This law, for the record, if signed by the governor, will go into effect on July 1st. And again, strictly speaking, by the wording of the law, in theory, parents of kids could also complain that the school is pushing heterosexual as an identity, in the same way that parents could object to the idea of it pushing homosexuality simply by bringing up same-sex parents. The thing is, that doesn't actually swing both ways, because parents of kids who want them to have a more complete education don't actually want to remove the discussion of heterosexuality, and for them to do so would only hurt the school anyway. So again, on paper, there are the exceptions that are necessary, and theoretically, the same complaints could be made about pushing heterosexuality and cisnormativity, but in practical terms, neither of those things will ever happen. And the complaints being made are only ever going to come about from people who object to anything that isn't cisgender and anything that isn't heterosexual. And there's one last interesting thing that I found out about this bill that I want to add in here. I looked at some of the amendments that were brought up and either were or weren't added, and there was one that really stood out to me. This was one of the last ones proposed, and it was not adopted. And this appeared to be somebody's attempt to try and mitigate the damage this bill is going to do. There was a proposal for an amendment which would have required the schools to make available a pamphlet to students and teachers, and that pamphlet would have been created in conjunction with at least two LGBTQIA groups. In this particular case, PFLAG and GLSEN. This appeared to be an attempt to basically say, okay, look, we grant that the parents have control over whether or not students are made aware of this, but we want to be sure that the parents have access to good information at the very least. We can't force them to pass these on to their kids. We can't force them to agree with them, but we can make it a requirement that these are available so that we know parents have access to the information. That, well, was not added. It would have been a Band-Aid if it had been, but somebody tried. So that's the law. Now we need to get into how Disney is tied to this. Now, the way I've seen it reported in a lot of places is that Disney backed the bill, or that Disney backed every single person who sponsored the bill. Now, neither of those are completely accurate. I don't want to say they're lies, but they are a little bit misunderstandings. Disney has not directly backed the bill. Financially, they can't. Corporations don't financially back direct legislation. They can voice their approval or disapproval of a law, certainly, and some companies do that. Disney itself has done that in other cases, some of which I'll bring up. But they have actually said nothing flat out about the law itself, positive or negative. Now, as for the idea that they have funded everyone who has sponsored the bill, there's one of two things going on there. The first is that might be referring to just Dennis Baxley and Joe Harding, because certain parts of the Disney company have financially backed the re-election campaigns of both of those. I'll get into specifics on that in a little bit. But I couldn't find confirmation of any of the co-sponsors of the bill who I named earlier. Now, the source for saying that Disney backed all of them, that seems to have its origins in a piece written in the Orlando Sentinel, which unfortunately I was not able to read myself because it's behind a paywall and I wasn't going to pay to read it. I did note, however, that it was in the opinion section, and that makes me a little bit dubious. I'm not going to definitively say that Disney has not done financial backing for any of the numerous co-sponsors. I will say I could not independently verify that. I could get verification of Baxley and Harding. I tried to go deeper into this to check on the others. I even went to Florida's campaign finance database, but the thing is labyrinthine and really badly designed, and I am not good enough at that kind of research to try and parse that thing. So I let it go. So from here on out, we are going to be focusing on how Disney has financed Joe Harding and Dennis Baxley. Now, the first thing to point out is that the Disney company, the parent company, has made no financial donations to either of these people. However, various elements and smaller companies within it have. And I was able to find details on this in a number of places, such as The Independent. And according to what I could find, Baxley's 2022 re-election campaign received $1,000 from Disney Photo Imaging. Meanwhile, Harding's 2022 re-election campaign received $1,000 donations from Disney Destinations LLC, Disney Gift Cards Service Incorporated, and Disney Photo Imaging Inc. So for the upcoming 2022 re-election for both of these candidates, it has been a total of $4,000 donated to their campaigns from various entities within Disney. Probably also worth bringing up is that in 2018, Baxley also received $1,000 donations from Disney Vacation Developments Inc. and Disney Destinations LLC. So that's where the financing of the sponsors of this bill come in. Now, again, as I said, the first thing to keep in mind is the big Disney, capital D, big Disney, did not directly contribute to these. Smaller entities within it did. Now, does that absolve them of any responsibility? No, but I do want to create an understanding where exactly at what level this happened. Because with an entity as large as Disney is, it is honestly not reasonable for everybody within the corporate structure or even the people at the top to be aware, especially in advance, of any specific donations being made by a smaller entity that has its own corporate structure and its own heads. The people at the top or the people in other parts of the company are not going to be keeping tabs on what everybody else is doing. They're not. Now, while I could not find specific dates on these donations, it is incredibly unlikely that they were made after the bill was proposed and was being moved forward. More likely, they would have been made at the time that the campaign for re-elections were first established for these candidates. So there is, at least on paper, the possibility that the specific branches of Disney that were contributing to them did not know that this was something that was going to be moving forward. And it is possible, or at least arguable, that had they known, they would not have made those donations. We don't know either way. I'm just allowing for the possibility. Hey folks, it's me again. Quick little note for something that I have come to realize since shooting this. While in the case of Joe Harding, he is coming off his first term in the Florida legislature and had no voting record prior to this current term for anyone to know exactly what he was going to do, Dennis Baxley has been pushing anti-LGBTQIA plus legislation since 2013. So I don't think anybody has an excuse for not realizing he was going to continue to do that. It's a little bit of plausible deniability with Harding. It really is not with Baxley. Okay, back to the other me. But now that we know how this ties into Disney, now we need to talk about how Disney, big capital D Disney, the Disney company, has been responding to this. And in particular, we need to bring up the current CEO, Bob Chapek, because there's been a lot of call for the company as a whole and for him in particular to respond to this, and they have done so minimally. And in Chapek's case, not at all. Hey folks, so this will be the first of a couple additional notes in this section because this has been the most ongoing and evolving portion of this entire thing. So Chapek has sort of made some statements, or rather he's been attached to some memos that have gone around internally at Disney. I will address those as they become relevant to the topic. But before anyone jumps down to the comments to say, oh, he has said some stuff, yeah, kind of, sort of, a little, I'll deal with it when it's relevant, okay? Okay, here we go. Now, a little bit about Chapek in particular. He took over from Bob Iger in 2020, and he is a much more low-key, stays behind the curtain sort of CEO than Iger was. Iger was not the most outspoken CEO in the world, but he was certainly more so than Chapek, and unfortunately the comparison is apt because Iger, in addition to Abigail Disney, who is the daughter of Roy Disney and the great niece of Walt Disney, have both come forward saying how awful this law is in various ways. So there are already people associated with the Disney brand, though not directly linked to it in any legal sense, who are saying this is terrible, but the actual company and the head of the company are being pretty silent for the most part. Now, a little bit about Chapek. He is currently registered as an independent as of 2016. Prior to that, he had been registered as a Democrat. Now, I don't want to parse too much about the man's personal politics because honestly, he's pretty quiet and private about them, as is his right. However, I don't think it is a massive leap for people to assume that he decided to become independent as opposed to Democrat to, at the very least, free himself up in a political, philosophical sense to go in a more conservative direction on specific issues should he feel it to be necessary. That may not be the case, but I don't think that's going to be an uncommon read on that simple fact. Now, The Hollywood Reporter did speak to an unnamed individual who is a source close to Chapek, who had a couple of specific things to say. They said that Chapek is staunchly opposed to bringing Disney into issues he deems irrelevant to the company and its business. Which, on the surface, fair enough, except that Disney is such a massive company and its roots in Florida especially run so deep that to claim that this is not impacting his business, especially a business that has in the last few years been heavily marketing itself and pushing the idea of it being LGBTQIA inclusive, and for the record, has been praised for its actual workplace environment, that working for Disney as an LGBTQIA plus person is one of the better companies to work for. But their reach goes far, far beyond that. I mean, they are a cultural monolith. So to sort of sit back and say nothing on the implication that this doesn't impact us, well, no, it does. And you impact it because companies that are part of you helped make this happen in an indirect way, admittedly, but they did. And while I do not feel that Bob Chapek or the Disney company are responsible for those initial donations being made, they do kind of have a responsibility to reply and respond to them in a meaningful sense, especially if they are going to continue to push and merchandise to LGBTQIA plus people and their allies. Okay, so this is the big thing that's happened since I originally shot this. A memo from Bob Chapek about everything going on has been released to the press. Not officially, which means that neither Disney itself as a company nor Chapek as an individual has actually made a formal statement about any of this. And in fact, part of the memo talks about the fact that they haven't and gives reasonings why. I am going to be referring to this memo a few more times across the remainder of this video because frankly, it's too much to go over all of it in one chunk right here. This is me just giving you the heads up that pretty much every time I jump in from here until the end of the video is going to be in reference to parts of this memo and how it shifts or makes clearer any of the points that I bring up later. Now, to come back to Bob Iger real quick, I think a good comparison here is when Bob Iger spoke out against the Georgia heartbeat bill that passed there and has been tied up in the courts ever since it passed. Now, when that initially passed, he felt that he had to speak about that because parts of Disney, specifically Marvel, are very entrenched in Georgia. A lot of the shooting is done in Atlanta. If you stay through the credits to catch any post-credit scenes, you've probably seen a special thing about Georgia with the Georgia Peach towards the end of the credits of pretty much every Marvel movie since Disney has acquired them. So he recognized that it was necessary to address the fact that Disney was going to continue to conduct its business there because realistically, they had set up such an apparatus there that trying to relocate it was probably not economically viable. But he understood that he had to say, this is something we are not okay with, and anyone who works for us who feels they cannot work in Georgia, we will support and attempt to help and relocate them and put them in a situation where they are comfortable. He had to say that because he understood that to say nothing was to tacitly endorse it simply by virtue of how much money was being pumped into the Georgia economy by the presence of Marvel. Quick note on this, I feel like I come across as overpraising Bob Iger just a little bit. While I do think it was helpful and necessary that he say the things that he said, it's not unfair if anyone wants to look back at that now and feel that it's pretty hollow. He actually even implied that Disney might stop working within Georgia. He implied that way back in 2019. That never actually happened, and with him no longer in charge of Disney, it is now even less likely to happen. So it is distinctly possible that all of this was fairly empty, but it did still mean that they made some point to say something, which is more than is being done now. So, whether you feel that is a largely empty gesture or not, from a strictly corporate PR sense, it was a very necessary one for him to do. And it's one that Bob Chapek seems unwilling to do in this similar situation in a state where Disney arguably has even deeper roots than it did in Georgia. Now, again, to be clear, Iger didn't speak up all that much or all that often considering how long he was the CEO, but he did on matters that he felt strongly about or he felt that it was important for the company to take a stand about. So I mentioned the Georgia heartbeat bill. He had similarly strong wording when Trump implemented his travel ban, which prevented travel from Muslim-majority countries into the United States. And he also left a presidential advisory board in the wake of Trump pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. Now, while these are statements, they are not numerous. He wasn't constantly doing this. This was over the course of all his time as CEO. These were the most prominent examples that I could find. But he did make certain statements that were leaning into the image that Disney has been building. Bob Chapek seems to want to court a much more neutral image than Iger seemed to be wanting. It probably doesn't help in this particular circumstance that some of the people Chapek has appointed as his immediate people that he works with, such as his chief of staff and his chief corporate affairs officer, both previously worked in the George W. Bush administration, which again is not an exact determination of what they do or don't want to support, but it does paint a generalized picture, which right now is not helped by his silence. Now, this isn't to say that Chapek is doing literally nothing. There does appear to be some stuff in the works, but it's all internal at Disney. There are multiple planned summits and meetings and conversations and large-scale talks going on within the Disney company, specifically to address the concerns of LGBTQIA+ members of the staff and the employees, which Chapek himself is scheduled to appear and talk and be talked to. I'll refer again to the memo here because in it, Chapek does bring up the upcoming Reimagine Tomorrow Summit being held for employees of the company in April. And he says that there will be conversations had there. It means if there is any change in direction in the company actually making an official statement prior to that, it means that pressure has been so harsh that they didn't even wait for the summit to happen. And if anything changes coming out of it, then it means that employees were actually able to sway him. And if nothing changes coming out of that, it means that they were not able to dissuade him from this current path of saying nothing. So some of you may be wondering, why does it matter? Why is it necessary that he say something or that Disney make a statement? Well, first of all, they did make a statement. I'll be dissecting that in a minute. But part of the reason is that their silence is being taken overtly by the people backing this bill as support. On the 4th of March, Dennis Baxley said, and I quote, "Disney has donated to my campaign and many others. They have a world of interest on a variety of topics that we address in the Florida legislature." Now, strictly taken as a comment in a vacuum, that's simply a statement of fact. That is factually true. However, it needs to be remembered that that statement was made in the context of Baxley being asked about HB 1557. So when asked about that bill and about Disney in any way being linked to that bill, he said, well, they support all kinds of people who do things that they feel is necessary. The heavy implication that he is drawing is that Disney wants what he's doing. Because if Disney does not say anything, does not either specify we do not wish to support them any longer, which they have not said, which has resulted in some headlines being they will continue to fund these people. We actually don't know if that's true. They may not, but they haven't said that they won't, which leaves open the possibility that they may continue to fund these individuals. Okay, memo time again. Nothing in the memo contradicts what I just said. They still have not definitively said that they will not fund these kinds of politicians anymore. However, it was addressed somewhat. Here's what is said in the memo. While we have not given money to any politician based on this issue, we have contributed to both Republican and Democrat legislators who have subsequently taken position on both sides of the legislation. Now, this one is a really weird and infuriating sentiment, basically saying, look, we're not financing anybody because of their stances on LGBTQIA+ rights, and the people we finance have been on both sides of that issue. First of all, I don't know why he thinks invoking anything even close to a both sides argument is in any way a good idea for him right now. But beyond that, this is basically him admitting we have absolutely no interest in what the effects of the people we give our money to have on the LGBTQIA+ community. You're admitting flat out, we give them money because of other things, and then it impacts this other thing that people are now upset about, sometimes positive, sometimes negatively. We don't take that into account. That's, again, not the helpful admission you seem to think it is. After that, he mentions that I can also share that Jeff Morrill, our new Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, this is one of the folks who used to work in the George W. Bush administration for the record, will be reassessing our advocacy strategies around the world, including political giving, as he begins to integrate the communications, public policy, and government relations and CSR teams. Now, here's the thing about this. This is the closest they come to saying that they are going to make any changes. But this, right now, as it stands, is not a pledge to change. It's not a pledge to do better, and it's not an apology for what happens. It is the first part dodging any direct responsibility for it, and this part saying, we are reviewing and assessing, but it doesn't say with what intent. Because to simply say that you're assessing, well, that's a statement of fact, but it's also completely neutral. Are you assessing because you intend to change things so that this sort of thing doesn't happen again? Are you you assessing just as a band-aid to make it look like you did something and have no intention of doing anything? Unless you say something like, we are assessing with the intent of avoiding this kind of outcome again, then the fact that you are assessing in and of itself is meaningless. But because they haven't said anything like that, or something to the effect of, look, we had other interests that they were pushing for that we thought were good things, but this is not something we're okay with, or anything to that effect, it would mean Dennis Baxley could not imply that Disney wants this, which right now he is not only able to imply, he is implying. Again, do not take his words in a vacuum. Remember that this was an answer to a question specifically about that bill. And his answer was, Disney supports all kinds of people who do all kinds of things. He is linking Disney support to the bill by invoking them in answering questions about that bill. He is saying you're on his side, Disney. You now have a duty to say, no, we are not. Because if you don't, they are taking your silence as agreement. And at a certain point, those of us who are inclined to give you the benefit of the doubt are going to have to start assuming the same thing. Gonna jump in real quick because in the memo, Chapek specifically said, I do not want anyone to mistake a lack of statement for a lack of support. We're not mistaking it. That's what it is. Because it's not simply a matter of you not commenting on it. The people who back this bill are implying in every way they can without flat out saying it, that you support them. And if you do not say, no, actually we don't, you are letting that implication stand unchallenged. That is support. Whether it is active support or if you feel it's something more passive, it doesn't matter. That is letting them invoke your name in what they are doing. One other thing that he said in the memo, he said, as we have seen time and again, corporate statements do very little to change outcomes or minds. Instead, they are often weaponized by one side or the other to further divide and inflame. Simply put, they can be counterproductive and undermine more effective ways to achieve change. Now, I think I understand part of what he's trying to convey here, and I understand that for corporations, it is aggravating that very frequently when they do issue statements of support or denouncing something, they are frequently told by people like me that it's not enough, because frankly, it's not. It's not enough to just say something, you have to also do it. But saying is better than nothing. And at this point, the idea of a statement being weaponized, that is a terrible take, because your lack of statement has already been weaponized by the other side. So you not making a statement means that you are okay with that side of the argument weaponizing your lack of a statement, but you won't make one because you're afraid that the allies of LGBTQIA plus people will weaponize that statement. Ship sailed. It's weaponized already. And you are saying that it's okay for the other side to have that weapon, and we cannot have it. A lack of statement is a lack of support at this point. So what statement did they make? Well, they issued a statement through Good Morning America, which reads thus. We understand how important the issue is to our LGBTQ plus employees and many others. For nearly a century, Disney has been a unifying force that brings people together. We are determined that it remains a place where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. The biggest impact we can have in creating a more inclusive world is through the inspiring content we produce, the welcoming culture we create here, and the diverse community organizations we support, including those representing the LGBTQ plus community. F*** you. You do not get to talk about how you still support and are inclusive towards LGBTQIA plus people at the same time that you have failed to address in any direct way the manner in which money made by your company directly contributed to people who are now pushing forward a bill that is directly harmful to trans and queer and the entire LGBTQIA plus spectrum of people. It is harmful to them. It is damaging to schools. It is bad for, frankly, everybody. And you do not get to have your money tied to the election and re-election of people who have brought that forward and then say, we're your friends and allies. And you especially, if you are failing to distance yourself from these outcomes, from this bill, from these people, from these donations, you especially do not get to invoke your inspiring content as an excuse for anything. I have been more than a little critical of Disney in their representation or lack of representation of LGBTQIA plus people up to this point. This has been going on with me towards them for years. This is absolute nonsense. But what I have always said is I will take poor representation over no representation, because poor representation at least means we are talking about it and we can work on making it better. And as painfully slow as Disney and its subsidiaries have been to give us decent inclusion, as slow as they have been to confirm characters as queer of any kind, much less important characters in anything related to Disney, Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, it has started happening. Progress, though way too slow, has been moving forward in these tiny, annoyingly incremental steps. This is the first time that I can remember Disney definitely backsliding. The progress, as infuriatingly slow as it has been, and the fact that your most overt piece of support for the LGBTQIA plus community being the Owl House, you canceled. And a quick note on that, Dana Terrence, the creator of the Owl House, is pissed, loudly, vocally, and calling out Bob Chapek in specific. Setting that aside, the progress has only been moving forward. It has been getting better. Slowly, too slowly, but it was. Until now. None of that, especially when, as I said, it's been too slow, too incremental, too disposable. When that is your inspiring content, that gives you no blanket excuse to not address the real harm being done with your money. On the subject of that inspiring content, there was a letter obtained by Variety, which appears to have been written by LGBTQIA plus members of Pixar and their allies. And there is some stuff in it that is very damning for Disney. In the letter, the employees of Pixar Animation alleged that the Disney corporate-level executives demanded cuts of nearly every moment of overtly gay affection, regardless of when there is protest from both the creative teams and the executive leadership at Pixar. This is really bad, and it's confirming something that has been speculated about for a very long time, that the top brass at Disney is putting a clamp down and heavy restrictions on what little representation we have even been getting. And to be fair, this is actually far more damning for Bob Iger than anybody else, because as far as the timing goes for the sorts of movies being discussed in this letter, he would have been the one in charge at the time. One other thing in the letter that sums all this up beautifully is this. Even if creating LGBTQIA plus content was the answer to fixing the discriminatory legislation of the world, we are being barred from creating it, which just blows apart the entire idea that the inspiring content somehow cancels out the money contributed to politicians, because that is not even being allowed to happen without severe restrictions. And do not tell me how little $4,000 total dollars split between two different state representatives is. I don't care how little it is. You put money behind them. And while I am not going to hold you personally responsible for that initial donation, because as I said, the entire corporate structure cannot know before these things happen. You know now. You know the impact. You have no right to dodge responsibility for this. Bob Chapek, the Disney company as a parent company, you have no right to say that the way you change the world is with your inspiring content when there is demonstrable harm being done with funds directly brought by you. F*** off. One final note about the memo. It does seem that to whatever degree the executives at Disney care about the LGBTQIA plus community, they are constantly framing it through their employees, with statements such as, while not perfect, our company has a long history of supporting the LGBTQ plus community and in fact has played an important role in the personal journeys of so many of our employees. As I stated before, they actually have a very good track record of taking care of their employees, but their reach goes way beyond that, and they need to acknowledge that impact, and they appear to be trying to with mentioning their inspirational content, but failing to acknowledge the negative impact. You don't get to take only the good. Oh, and fun fact, turns out I've been mispronouncing Bob's name this whole time. It's not Chapek, it's Chapek. I am not actually going to be issuing any kind of apology about that. I wouldn't want my statement to be weaponized and cause divisiveness later on down the line, but I'll just note it here. If you're going to put things like this in your stores, under your branding, it has to mean something. And I have been a mild defender of Disney up to this point. I have made the argument that despite the fact that I wish progress was going faster, I have made the argument that even the token representation and support that we've gotten is still something, because it is them signing off on the idea that us being normalized, us being a viable demographic, us having a right to be here matters when a company that big does it. But I will not issue that defense when you give your dollars to groups and people like this and then do not address that fact. So Chapek ended up saying a few things at a virtual meeting that I want to address real quick. Firstly, it's interesting that he went through the entire meeting not addressing this, and it was literally the last thing he did. And I'm not going to go through the entire thing. This video is running long enough as it is, but I'm going to pull out two specific parts that illustrate why this is completely insufficient. First, there's this. We were opposed to the bill from the outset, but we chose not to take a public position on it because we felt we could be more effective working behind the scenes, engaging directly with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. Which almost sounds like an admission that the bill is a bad idea, but actually is not. Firstly, the way Chapek is claiming that they were trying to adjust it is a way that really is not confirmable. And again, we have the direct invocation of both sides in a situation where, like, why? Why is this a both sides issue? No one on the left was part of this bill. He then said he called the Florida governor, something which the governor's office has confirmed, although that office also confirmed in the same statement that the governor's stance and intention to sign the bill has not changed. And then the other thing he said was that certainly the outcome in Florida was not what many of us were hoping for, especially our LGBTQ plus employees. Again, citing the employees and almost deferring the concern onto them. This is not something that the company is unhappy with the outcome of. This is not something he's unhappy with the outcome of. Certain people, especially these people, again, it is associating himself with people who are absolutely against this, but not actually confirming it. He is skirting so far to the line, but he will not cross it. And he is going so far out of his way, he is dancing around the fact that he will not address whether or not he or Disney as a parent company support this bill. Every wording of this is carefully crafted to avoid any admission in either direction. And even with the earlier part where he said that they were against this bill from the beginning, there was no admission of their part in helping it get created in the first place. No admission of guilt, no admission of regret, no responsibility taken. You need to come clean and either admit that this is all bullshit or own up to the fact that you did harm and made a mistake. Those are your two options. And if you take neither, I, for one, am taking that as an endorsement of what is being done with your money. Take some responsibility, because when you target us for merchandising and you sign off and approve of gay days during Pride at Disney parks, you have no business asking for our money and our support. Jumping in for what should be the last time, because this thing just keeps on evolving as the week has gone on. Chapek's latest attempt to make this all go away without actually issuing any kind of statement on it has gone very badly for him. He made an announcement that the Disney company would pledge $5 million to the Human Rights Campaign as well as other LGBTQIA+ rights organizations. The Human Rights Campaign rejected the donation, stating in a response, the Human Rights Campaign will not accept this money from Disney until we see them build on their public commitment and work with the LGBTQ+ advocates to ensure that dangerous proposals like Florida's Don't Say Gay or Trans bill don't become dangerous laws, and if they do, to work to get them off the books. This is Chapek running out of options. He is clearly doing everything he possibly can to make this go away, up to now literally throwing $5 million at the problem, and people are not swallowing it. He is virtually out of options as far as anything other than issuing an actual formal statement about his or the company's stance on this bill. And while I have said in the past, I do believe there is still a net positive for money donated to a good cause, even if that money was donated in not the best circumstances. I have to take my hat off to the Human Rights Campaign here, because they effectively said to him, hey, you throw a Molotov cocktail into a living room and now you're offering to redo the driveway. We are not going to let you do that until you explain and address what it was you did and pledge to not do it ever again. And you know what? they were right to do so. Now, going forward, I'm going to treat this similar to how I have been treating the issue of the BBC and transphobia. When I discuss anything currently controlled by the Disney Corporation, there will be a disclaimer and an asterisk at the front of it. I will still review these things, partly because it is my job. It is how I make my living, and I cannot afford to simply stop talking about Marvel or Star Wars or Disney. However, I can point out, and I will, until something is done, until something is addressed, I will point out in every video that you are doing this and have not said that you will stop doing it, and you have not denounced this law. And now let's cover the thing that happened yesterday. So Chapek sent out another email to employees, which has, of course, gotten in the hands of the media. I won't be going through the entire thing. You can certainly read it for yourself. But I'm going to go through the things that I feel are necessary to highlight. At the end of the first paragraph, he says, "It is clear that this is not just an issue about a bill in Florida, but instead yet another challenge to basic human rights." Yes, it is. Thank you for finally realizing that. "You needed me to be a stronger ally in the fight for equal rights, and I let you down." Yes, you did. And then finally he says, "I am sorry." This is late, but these are the words that he has danced around and refused to say for a painfully long amount of time, despite the fact that this has only been a matter of weeks that this has been going on. Next paragraph, he says, "Our employees see the power of this great company as an opportunity to do good." I agree. Yes, we need to use our influence to promote that good by telling inclusive stories, but also by standing up for the rights of all. This one's pretty big because it's a direct admission that what was said before about influential stories, inspiring stories, and whatnot is not enough, and a recognition of that, or at least an admission of it. I mean, there's the usual caveat of how sincere this is, or if it's just put together by a PR team who knew what needed to be said at this point. I don't know, but it is at least addressing that issue. The next paragraph talks about their political giving. Specifically, he says, "We are pausing all political donations in the state of Florida pending this review." Now, that's certainly more concrete action than the reassessing that was mentioned before. It does, however, not specifically indicate with what intent, and a pause is just a pause, it's not a stop. So it does indicate that they do intend to continue to do political giving. There's mention in the previous sentences about giving to more advocacy groups, but the political giving is also separate from that. So it's not really being as direct as I would have liked, but at least within context, it is saying something not a million miles away from what I was liking, but, you know, I'm still going to critique this. He does say you will hear more about our progress in coming weeks, so he seems to have understood he can't just hide behind the corporate plan and say, well, we're working on it. People have eyes on him now. The last thing I want to bring up is actually the very first sentence and the context of that. This whole thing begins with, "To my fellow colleagues, but especially our LGBTQ plus community." I think it's worth pointing out that, once again, this was not a publicly made statement. This was an internal email that at this point he must have known was going to be leaked to the press. Now, that is about the one major thing that I still have concerns about. He seems to only be framing this through the lens of his employees. Now, it's great that he's looking out for his employees, that there seems to be at least an understanding that he has to look concerned about his employees, if not actually a genuine concern. But there is still some question as to how much he actually understands the impact of the company outside of the people who directly work for it. There's some token acknowledgement of it here, but the fact that, again, this wasn't even a public statement means that technically he still hasn't said anything to the general public. He has only spoken to the company and to the employees, and at this point I have no doubt with full knowledge that it would get to the public and be treated like a statement, even though it isn't. Now, that does not negate what is said here, and this is not quite, but it is at least in the ballpark of what I said I needed from him and from the company. I haven't had enough time to mull all this over to decide whether or not I'm still going to be adding an addendum to the front of all Disney-related reviews or videos that I do. I need to sleep on it a little bit more and also keep an eye on the follow-through for all this. But I'm going to say that that is on pause, currently being reassessed. Welcome to the party, Bob. I guess now you've realized you can't just sit in the corner and think that we'll ignore you. All right, let's wrap this up. I got more upset talking about this than I had intended to. I really wanted this to be as calm and restrained as I could make it. But this is not okay. This bill is deeply, deeply harmful. And a company that has found out that any of its money, and not just from its employees, from actual companies, official companies that are part of it, helped contribute to the campaigns of people who brought this about, You do not get to be silent about that. That is all that I have to say on this issue. I know I got heated. I know it's contentious and infuriating. Be as polite as you can to me, to even the representatives, and to Bob Chapek, because I will not stand for personal attacks. Criticize them all you want, but the minute it gets to name slinging or unfounded accusations, I will remove it, no matter who it's being thrown at, even people who I have a deep dislike for right now. So keep it civil, and if you can do that, drop your thoughts down in the comments, and let's talk about it. Patreon is how I'm able to do what I do, and why I'm able to take a full day to research something like this. If you want to help support my ability to make this kind of content or anything else that I do, the Patreon is the best way to do that. If you're not able to do so, like, share, subscribe, and the comments, those all help. They help me not get completely ignored by the algorithm, which it likes to do from time to time. But whatever you decide to do, whatever is next, I need you to remember that you are beautiful, you are valid, you are loved. You are the council. I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. It's the end credits. Means I got to shout out some patrons. This month, it is Turok, Oliver B., Linda Walters, TT, Robin Powell, Fernobulax, The Poodle, Eidolon, Tracy Scrabbit, Dharma, Michael Doyle, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Angry Casperl, Adam Lefty Taylor, Robin Moore, Shayla Gourlay, and Bookworm. Thanks so much for your support.